Hi everyone. So I think that book titling is somewhat of a lost art. It's kind of hard to make a great title, and in my opinion, there are such things as good titles and bad titles, and also there's in betweens. I feel like sometimes books are trying a little too hard to stand out and call your attention. Some are just kind of following cliches and trends, and some are just like blatantly riding the coattails of other more well-known and more successful titles. You may not think of book titles as important, and I feel like once you read the book they really aren't, but obviously they are the first thing aside from the cover that you see from a book and that you know of a book, and sometimes you even know of the title before you actually see any of the covers. And of course the title is also more permanent, like you could have any cover in different editions, but the title is typically still gonna be the same. And I think it says a lot that the title can use wordplay in a way that tells you right off the bat that the author is really good at playing with words, at using words, and believe it or not all authors are necessarily good at it. Which is why we have so many terrible books being published on a regular basis. I'm only going to mention 15 titles. So these are the top 15 best book titles in my opinion. Some of them I have read, some I haven't. Also, some of them are going to be translated titles, and there's sometimes the title is actually different in the original language, but I still think that for English speaking titles, these are the 15 best ones. So number 15 is going to be Pale Fire. This is a novel by Vladimir Nabokov. I haven't read it. From what I understand, it's sort of a very long poem by a fictional poet, so it's actually written by Nabokov, of course, but via this fictional poet. So I think a lot, like I said, a lot about the art on the book titles is about choosing words to imply certain things and to leave certain things unanswered or leave us asking certain questions, but also not too many. The word fire in metaphors is usually used to kind of give this connotation of strength and power and something being destructive. But the word pale also implies some sort of weakness or something that's kind of light and airy and delicate and maybe not, again, in a way, sort of the opposite of a fire, even though obviously fire is a light. I mean, it creates light, so by definition it is pale in a sense, but it's also not pale in that weak connotation of the word. It's not the usual paradox that sometimes is used as a cliche of like having two opposing words just kind of make one phrase that sounds deep but doesn't really mean anything. So number 14 is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I have read this one, and one of the first things that I thought about this book was that it kind of implied this kind of loss of innocence, of course, since that's typically what happens with the loss of the ending of childhood. But once you read the book, it actually has a different meaning that has to do with the ending of the book, because the novel is a science fiction novel, and it's about, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but it kind of refers to the end of humanity in a way, but it also has to do with childhood specifically. So if you have read that book, you probably know what I'm talking about. But yes, it doesn't refer to childhood purely in that innocence connotation, but also in a more like the future of humanity connotation, as children being the future and all that. So number 13 is Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. So first of all, the use of the comma literally interrupts the title, so that's pretty clever right there, although it is pretty simple, I do have to admit. But again, even then, it's a pretty iconic title for a good reason. It gets referenced all the time, and in only 2 words it's able to, you know, imply certain things. Of course, girl implying, meaning a young woman who is interrupted, like her life is interrupted, something happens, right? I mean, it kind of tells you the story in a very, very summarized way. So number 12 is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And it's really strange, even if not very surprising, to think that initially the title of this 40s novel, it contained a racial slur. And not just any slur, you know, it was that one. And it's crazy to think that this amazing title of And Then There Were None was just around the corner, and instead she apparently chose this other version of the title, or she first thought of it, who knows. Because really the title And Then There Were None was such a fine way to subtly hint at the subject matter of murder, while also at this mysterious form of murder, right? Like this very sudden thing, like And Then There Were None. So number 11 is The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil. So this is one of those that is translated. This was originally a German title, so the term quality doesn't really mean the same thing. But I think either interpretation makes for a really interesting title. It can mean like properties or characteristics, and for the English language, sometimes quality is used to mean specifically positive qualities, although it could really mean either. But I think either are interesting, like the idea that there's someone who has no properties or characteristics to them whatsoever would basically make them like nobody, like a no one, you know, someone who is nothing. And then also the idea of someone having no positive qualities whatsoever is just really striking. Although I do think that the original sense, what I figure is probably the original sense of the title, is a bit more interesting. But I wouldn't know how accurate it is for the book because I haven't read it. It's actually an unfinished novel, a very long one from what I understand. Number 10 is I Am No One You Know by Joyce Carol Oates. I don't know why this one fascinates me so much. I can't really explain it the same way that I could with previous ones. Again, I haven't read this one, so this is entirely a guess that I'm making from nothing, just from the title. And I know she makes kind of like dark or maybe horror-like or thriller-like books, so I'm probably off in my interpretation, but it seems as if someone were telling you, even though you seem familiar to them, you don't actually know them. You have never seen them before, but they seem oddly familiar to you, and you could swear that you do really know them. But again, it could mean a number of different things. Number 9 is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, which I have read and reviewed as well. I was mostly intrigued to read this book, by this book because of the title, and I would say that novel is, I would say it's about agoraphobia, or maybe I was just projecting. It kind of implies it in a way in the title. We have always lived in the castle. I mean, the fact that you have to point it out kind of tells you in a way that really you haven't always lived in the castle, or because you feel this need to reassure someone else that you have. And it's really about this family that's is very isolated, and they really keep to themselves in this castle, but it's really more of a mansion. But they are kind of shunned by the rest of the town, but it's a bit complicated. There is kind of a reason why they're shunned, but at the same time, you're kind of on their side as well. And really something that I only thought of very recently regarding this book is that it kind of inverts the idea, the cliche of the haunted mansion in a way, because since it is about agoraphobia, it gives you this threatening image of the outside world and of this town in general, and of new people, right, of strangers, whereas typically the idea behind horror of the haunted house in a horror setting is that you don't even feel safe in your house, which is somewhat what happens really in this book as well. That you live in this very isolated but still fairly peaceful environment, and then something from the outside corrupts it. So number 8 is As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, which I haven't read. Again, the title is what intrigues me. But I mean, I guess it's kind of interesting that you start not just start, but before the novel even starts, the narrator in a way is referencing their own death, which is typically, if anything, it happens at the very end of the novel, or it doesn't even get mentioned at all, especially when it's a first person narration, because I guess it kind of breaks the suspension of disbelief to think that someone would write afterwards from their own perspective once as they're dying, or obviously after they're dead. That's obviously impossible, so it kind of forces you to it will take you out of the narration, I guess. Depends on how you write it. So number 7 is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterrica. But again, I have to say, this is one of those translated titles. The original title is Cadáver Exquisito, which is just Exquisite Corpse, and it's kind of a writing technique, so it's not really a very interesting title. But whoever translated it, I guess it might have been her really who translated the title, but those kinds of things are kind of unknown to me because I'm not very familiar with the whole publishing thing and how it works. But it's interesting to think about. We typically describe meat as being tender pretty often, but flesh kind of has a different connotation, because we don't typically refer to human flesh as meat or as flesh even. That's basically what the book is about, from what I know. I haven't actually read it, but it's kind of showing you, it's sort of making an equivalence between eating animals and eating humans. Obviously humans are animals as well, but humans eating humans versus animals or other animals. I do believe it's a reference to F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night, which is a bit more subtle, but I don't think everything always has to be about subtlety. I think it's interesting to juxtapose tender and flesh in reference to, again, things that we don't typically refer to as tender. So number 6, We Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow We Will Be Killed with Our Families by Philip Gorevich. So this is about the Rwandan genocide. I don't really know anything else about this book besides that. I guess the point of wording it this way is that it comes off so detached and matter of fact. Like, obviously the starting off with "We wish to inform you" makes it seem like a formal announcement of something that is just a fact, right? Like, there's nothing you can do about it. I don't know a lot about this genocide, but I do remember seeing a few anecdotes here and there on YouTube about it, and it seemed that, from what people said, it seemed that people who took part of it back when it happened, who were the perpetrators, weren't even like really thinking about it much themselves, and were just kind of doing things as if they, I guess it's a little bit similar to other genocides in a way, in which people don't think about the ethics of what they do at all. And I guess that is somewhat reflected in this book title, the way that it's just kind of stated so bluntly and as a fact. Number 5 is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is really just here for the simple reason of that it makes you think, like, what were they carrying, I mean, it's such a vague phrase, but it's vague enough that it makes you question things, but at the same time not so vague that it doesn't really say anything at all, in my opinion. So number 4 is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. I don't know why I find this one so curious. I just think that I mean, I think it is about a road trip or something like that, and taking drugs and all these things. I'm pretty sure it's a novel from the 70s. But the fear and loathing part of it kind of makes you know really from the beginning that what you're going to read is not all about fun, it's definitely, it has a bit more issues going on than what maybe you think of at first when you think of Las Vegas or road trip or something like that, taking drugs in Las Vegas. Number 3 is My Heart is a Chainsaw. So this is by Stephen Graham Jones, and I do have a pretty negative review of what I'm pretty sure is his first novel, The Only Good Indians. I didn't like that one at all, but I am interested in My Heart is a Chainsaw mainly because of the title. I mean, My Heart is a Chainsaw. Like, typically, of course, again, the metaphor, the heart is typically used in metaphors to talk about something soft or something really vulnerable and something that's really like part of the very innermost part of your soul. And my heart is a weapon, and specifically this really sharp and really abrasive weapon, right? And honestly, even if I end up not liking this novel, I will probably still think that the title is great. It just really it makes you stop to think about it for a moment. So number 2 is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and I have read this one as well, again mainly because of the title. I think this is just, I mean, Their Eyes Were Watching God, it kind of makes you think, visually it makes you think of someone looking at the sky, right? But it really tells more than that. Again, it's all in the connotation, in the use of the words. Like, whose eyes were watching God? And from what I remember, the subject was animals. She was talking about animals because in the story there was this part where there was gonna be this huge flood or a storm or something like that, and the animals were able to tell that something was happening. And the narration, which I'm pretty sure it's a first person, was talking about how the animals were looking, were watching God. So you could say, looking at the sky. The entire, really, the whole, the writing style of this novel, narration wise, in terms of the narrative part, not the dialogue, is actually so good, and it's probably the main highlight of the novel as a whole. And I guess it would be worth it to read it just for that, but it is a pretty depressing novel and it's very difficult to get through, but I'm glad I read it still. And titles like that just make you really curious as to what happens in the story and like in what context does the line appear. And number 1, which I hope not to disappoint you with this one because this is another translated title, but the number 1 for me is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. So this is again a translated title. It's of course Japanese. I'm not really sure what obviously if I don't speak Japanese I can't really tell you what the original title would really mean, but I think I really find the idea of no longer human just so, I mean, it really keeps me up, at night sometimes thinking about what it means to not be human, to have once been human and then not being human. It makes me think of a lot of different things, right? For example, certain torture methods, right? And I know this novel is about suicide, but I'm just talking purely about the titles, right? It makes me think of, for example, if you've seen those videos of people like Visas, for example, when he went into that room, that white room, and he stayed there for like 3 days, and there was no stimuli or anything, like he had nothing to entertain his mind with, and he had lost a sense of time, and because there was no windows or anything, he had lost his sense of time and self, and he was really broken by the end. And it makes you think about other people who are put in similar situations, not even willfully, of course, who they are kind of by definition stripped of their humanity, not just because they're tortured, but also because of how they become while they're inside. Like, in these situations, I guess you can obviously go back to being a human again, but it's like you're temporarily being removed, like your humanity is temporarily being removed. But it makes me think about what would it mean, what would it entail to stop being human permanently but still being alive, right? And I think it kind of reminds me a lot of the manga The Fall of Amigahara or something like that by Junji Ito. That one that has, if you have seen the ending of that manga, I'm sure you know what I mean. Because if you think about it, it's the stories about humans who cease to be human over time, although it's obviously really short. But I think that a lot of the fear that manga made me feel when I read it is related to that concept of still being alive and still being technically the same species, but having become something else, not necessarily something beyond or below human, but just something that can't be considered human anymore. And it is also very similar to the concept of childhood's end, except that instead of it being a new generation that is no longer human, it's like the same person. Like within their lifetime, they just become something else that can no longer be called human. So yeah, those are my top 15 book titles of all time. I think these are the best ones, and I would love to know which ones you think are the best book titles of all time for whatever reason that may be. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.